I have some very sad news. Nvidia's GeForce RTX 5090 is no longer fast enough for the ultimate gaming experience. This is a truly devastating day for PC gaming. What hope do everyday buyers have when Nvidia's $4,700 model is not good enough? 60 FPS ultra settings is off the table even when using upscaling, path tracing is a challenge. It's difficult to see a way forward for the RTX 5090, and even though this unit survived the 12-volt high-power melting wars, it's time to put it out of its misery. Jokes aside, the RTX 5090, it genuinely is not fast enough for the type of gaming I'll be exploring in this video, which is higher than 4K resolution gaming. You'll see the results soon, but this is actually quite funny because if you go back to September 2020, would you look at that? The new pinnacle is here, claims Nvidia, because you can do 8K HDR gaming on the GeForce RTX 3090, the world's first 8K gaming GPU. At 8K, detail is so crisp and clear that we can discern individual bricks and blades of grass, distant game elements are instantly recognizable, and from behind the shoulder of your player character, individual hairs, stitching on clothes, and wrinkles on skin are appreciable. 8K enables you to view your games with unprecedented detail and clarity. Nvidia goes on to claim that the RTX 3090 makes 8K possible because of a huge leap in GPU horsepower and new technologies like DLSS Ultra Performance. They claimed smooth 8K gameplay across a host of both ray-traced and non-ray-traced games. Media at the time like Engadget parroted these claims, saying Nvidia had finally cracked 8K gaming. Even Marques Brownlee got his hands on an RTX 3090 and one day before normal reviews went live, claimed that 8K gaming on this card was surprisingly impressive. That video has 11.5 million views, by the way. This was all a bit of a joke because no gamer would realistically use an RTX 3090 for 8K gaming. At the time, the main way to play 8K games was on a very expensive 8K TV, and those TVs, like the LG Z9 Marques used in his video, were limited to just 60Hz in the 8K mode. Bit of a downgrade for the high-end gamers that were used to high refresh rate monitors, given that 1440p 144Hz was common at the time, and 4K 144Hz was an emerging category that might have tempted 3090 buyers in a more realistic way. Even the LG Z9 could be used at 4K 120Hz, which you'd obviously choose over 8K 60Hz for gaming. As time went on, this whole 8K gaming thing just became sillier and sillier. 8K TVs never really took off. Even today, most respected TV reviewers recommend 4K models as the best on the market, and the 8K monitor space remained for professionals only. You can buy an 8K monitor, but they're only 60Hz and are part of creator lineups like Dell UltraSharp and Asus ProArt. Asus's model costs $8,800 US, by the way, which is about 8 times as much as a 4K OLED. There are no high refresh rate models in existence. Eventually, the whole thing fizzled out. No one bought an RTX 3090 for 8K gaming. It was just a very powerful graphics card offering the best experience for realistic resolutions like 4K. Fast forward 5 years and Nvidia launched the RTX 5090, which is roughly twice as fast as the RTX 3090, except at this point, everyone has forgotten about 8K gaming. It's still dumb, it still makes absolutely no sense, and the only mention of 8K in Nvidia's 50 series announcement was a reference to the display output capabilities of this GPU. The actual gaming benchmarks provided were run at 4K. But now in 2026, we're entering a pretty interesting time because actual genuine gaming monitors are beginning to exceed 4K in resolution. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I reviewed the world's first 6K gaming monitor on Monitors Unboxed, the Samsung Odyssey G80HS. This is not a professional monitor. Samsung markets it to gamers, it's part of their gaming line, and it includes a bunch of gaming features, including, crucially, a 165Hz refresh rate, the first time we've seen a high refresh rate on a 32-inch high DPI monitor. Variable refresh, G-Sync, FreeSync, the whole works is here. While I don't necessarily recommend it for a bunch of reasons I covered in my review, you could use this monitor for 6K gaming, and not in a silly way where you buy a non-gaming 8K display and then use it for gaming. No, I mean, you actually can use this realistically for gaming at 6K. It has proper features to do so, and some people might want to do so, especially if you also use your monitor for productivity work that benefits from the very high resolution. This begs the question, if the RTX 3090 was advertised as capable of 8K gaming at a time when 8K gaming made absolutely no sense, can the much more powerful RTX 5090 genuinely play games at a 6K resolution when actual 6K gaming monitors hit the market? Surely, if the 3090 could do 8K in 2020's games, that the 5090 could do 6K in the latest titles. I wasn't originally going to make this video, but a few of our Patreon members were interested in what 6K gaming actually looks like after I reviewed the G80HS, so here we are. I'm going to look at 6K gaming, and I'm going to do so not just on the RTX 5090, but also on the relatively more affordable, but still very expensive RTX 5070 Ti. Now, there's a few things to know about 6K gaming. Firstly, you can't even access this monitor's highest refresh rate on older GPUs. On the 40 series, for example, which has just DisplayPort 1.4 and HDMI 2.1, it will not run at 6K above 60Hz. You need an NVIDIA Blackwell card with DisplayPort 2.1 and a faster display engine to even think about enabling the 165Hz mode. So funnily enough, the 8K gaming RTX 3090 can't even properly use the first true 6K gaming monitor. Secondly, 6K is a massive jump in resolution from 4K. It doesn't sound like a huge jump at first glance, but a 6144 by 3456 resolution is 21.2 million pixels compared to just 8.3 million pixels for 3840 by 2160 4K. That's a 2.6 times increase in pixel count, which puts a massive amount of additional strain on the GPU core and VRAM. So you might be thinking, why would anyone bother with 6K gaming? That's a ridiculous jump in requirements compared to 4K, which already looks good enough. And if you thought that, you'd largely be right, although the resolution and sharpness of the Odyssey G80HS is very impressive in games. Not a revolutionary step up over 4K, but it does look better, especially in the latest titles that are filled with fine details, dense grass, high resolution textures, that sort of thing. From a resolution standpoint, this display does look incredible while gaming. Let's get into the performance data, and I thought a good way to approach this would be to first look at what is a potentially realistic configuration for gaming on an RTX 5090 at 4K. So it turns out this GPU is capable of playing using the maximum ray tracing overdrive preset, so path tracing, using the DLSS performance mode at about 85 FPS on average. Certainly very decent, and you'll know from our recent DLSS coverage that the performance mode at 4K is a great way to play, providing a high level of detail and minimal artifacts despite a relatively low render resolution. If I try to play that same graphics configuration at 6K, the frame rate absolutely tanks to just 42 FPS, so performance is just about halved compared to 4K gaming. To get the RTX 5090 delivering a playable frame rate in this title, I had to turn off ray tracing entirely. The Ultra preset with DLSS performance delivered 72 FPS on average. In a way, 6K gaming is possible here, just not with the maximum in-game settings like is possible at 4K. And when you use the Ultra preset at 4K, you get 134 FPS. So even then, I'd say the 4K mode at the higher frame rate makes more sense than 6K at 70 FPS. The RTX 5070 Ti fares even worse. The 5090 is obviously a much faster GPU, around 70% faster in our testing, so it's no surprise to see the 5070 Ti struggle with path tracing at 4K, even using DLSS performance. It's more realistic to use this GPU just with the normal Ultra preset, which achieves around 90 FPS. But then at 6K, the 5070 Ti is pretty much crippled using either the Overdrive or Ultra preset, failing to achieve a 40 FPS average, which is not a very good experience. On this GPU, to even approach 60 FPS at 6K, you have to reduce the preset to medium or drop to the high preset and use DLSS Ultra performance mode. In Crimson Desert, you can enjoy this game at 4K on the RTX 5090 using the maximum in-game settings, so that's the cinematic preset with ray reconstruction enabled, a feature that significantly cleans up and improves the ray tracing presentation. With DLSS 4.5L quality enabled, I was getting 63 FPS in my benchmark pass, which is, pretty decent. At 6K though, the game drops to below 30 FPS using the same settings, and the only way to recover that performance is to disable ray reconstruction and drop the DLSS tier 1 notch to balanced. In this title, using lower upscaling modes does have an impact on shadow and texture qualities. That's not ideal, but it does allow the game to run at 66 FPS. Meanwhile, the RTX 5070 Ti is not really capable of much in this game. Using the cinematic preset with ray reconstruction disabled, this GPU can achieve around 70 FPS at 4K, but that drops to just 36 FPS when gaming at 6K, and even lower if you decide to enable ray reconstruction. The only way to get this GPU into a playable state is reducing the preset all the way down to medium and enabling DLSS 4.0 on the performance mode, which just edges ahead of 60 FPS at 6K. Mafia: The Old Country runs quite well on the RTX 5090 at 4K, averaging 85 FPS using the Epic preset with DLSS quality enabled. The hit when dropping to 6K is lower in this game, only falling to 54 FPS using the Epic preset, which is not the best experience, but it's reasonable. And in this title, you can get a very playable 85 FPS at 6K by dropping the preset one tier to high and then also dropping DLSS to the performance mode. The 5070 Ti struggles as expected. It can play the game at 89 FPS using the high preset with DLSS performance upscaling, but this configuration drops to just 53 FPS at 6K. To edge above 60 FPS at this resolution, I had to drop the preset all the way to low while continuing to use DLSS performance upscaling, so not an ideal configuration there. Doom: The Dark Ages is playable on the RTX 5090 using max settings. If you enable the Ultra Nightmare preset and path tracing with all the settings enabled, then also use DLSS performance upscaling, you'll get 85 FPS in the benchmark run I used. Maybe not the highest frame rate for a fast-paced shooter, but decent enough considering the settings being used. You can't say the same playing this game at 6K using the same settings. The RTX 5090 tanked to just 43 FPS, and this is very much not a good way to play Doom. However, if you are willing to disable path tracing and just use the regular Ultra Nightmare preset, still with DLSS performance enabled, you can push the frame rate back up to 82 FPS. However, that configuration at 4K runs at 167 FPS, so the upgrade in resolution is really costing you a high refresh rate experience on the 5090. The 5070 Ti in typical fashion is a bit of a bust for 6K gaming in Doom: The Dark Ages. The game does run at 92 FPS using the Ultra Nightmare preset with DLSS performance upscaling, but this configuration drops to 44 FPS at 6K. To even achieve over 60 FPS, I had to drop the preset to low and enable DLSS Ultra performance upscaling, which is a much worse visual experience, so you can pretty much forget about playing this title at 6K on the 5070 Ti. The impact in some games is not as massive. For example, in Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, the RTX 5090 runs at 88 FPS at 4K using the maximum ultra-high preset with DLSS quality upscaling. That's pretty decent, and when you switch over to 6K gaming, the frame rate only drops to 57 FPS. That's short of the 60 FPS I like to see, but it isn't anywhere near the drop-off we saw in Cyberpunk 2077 from a similar starting frame rate. Reducing the render resolution to 25% manually, which avoids the weird and incorrect upscaling in this game mode using the built-in performance mode, it improves the 6K experience to 74 FPS on the 5090, and that's without dropping the preset. These settings run at 103 FPS at 4K, so when you compare the two resolutions, Black Flag Resynced is surprisingly compatible with the 6K resolution. It's a bit more of a struggle with the 5070 Ti. To begin with at 4K, if you want to use the ultra-high preset, you'll have to set a 25% render scale to achieve over 60 FPS, the equivalent of using DLSS performance upscaling. These settings only run at 45 FPS at 6K, and you need to drop the overall preset to medium if you want to continue playing with the frame rate just above 60 FPS. In Forza Horizon 6, the Extreme plus RT preset with DLSS quality upscaling is a great way to play on the RTX 5090 at 4K, achieving nearly 100 FPS. If you use the same settings with a 6K resolution, the frame rate does drop to just 56 FPS, which I'd say is insufficient for a racing game, but it's not a terrible frame rate compared to what we've seen in other titles. Turning off ray tracing and just using the extreme mode pushes the frame rate back up to 102 FPS, which is highly playable, although that mode runs at over 150 FPS at 4K. The game is also playable on the 5070 Ti provided you don't enable ray tracing. At 4K we get 102 FPS using the Extreme preset with DLSS quality upscaling, and that drops to 61 FPS at 6K. Using ray tracing is not really possible here, and 60 FPS is far from amazing, but given we are only using DLSS quality upscaling and the highest non-RT preset, there's room to achieve even better performance. I was also interested to see how Battlefield 6 would run on these GPUs, given that in a competitive multiplayer shooter, I generally want to target at least 120 FPS, not 60 FPS, and that's very doable on the RTX 5090 at 4K. I got 137 FPS in our benchmark using the maximum overkill preset with DLSS quality enabled. I'd be satisfied with that for general play. At 6K, this configuration drops to 77 FPS, and while this is above 60 FPS, it's a much less smooth experience. Some people might find this acceptable for a multiplayer game. I'm not particularly enthused with that result, so I ended up drastically reducing the quality settings. Unfortunately, to achieve 120 FPS, I had to go all the way to the low preset and use DLSS performance upscaling, which is not ideal, especially when you consider that this configuration runs at nearly 200 FPS at 4K. The 5070 Ti I'd also describe as not really suitable for 6K gaming in Battlefield. At 4K, the overkill configuration runs at 89 FPS and the low configuration runs at 150 FPS. Both are decent enough, especially when dropping a little below overkill settings. But at 6K, even that lowest configuration only runs at 78 FPS, and when dropping the DLSS mode to ultra performance, effectively the lowest settings in the game, I was still only getting 90 FPS. The last game I want to look at is Marvel Rivals. In the benchmark tool, I was getting pretty excellent performance on the 5090, 124 FPS using the Ultra preset and 218 FPS using the low preset, both with DLSS performance upscaling at 4K. The Ultra configuration is unfortunately not that playable at 6K. It does average 77 FPS, but I'd much rather drop the settings to low and achieve 116 FPS. The 5070 Ti struggles a bit like in Battlefield. At 4K you can achieve 148 FPS using the low preset with DLSS performance, but this only delivers 70 FPS when you go up the resolution to 6K. Going all the way down to DLSS Ultra performance will improve the frame rate to 96 FPS on average, but that hardly seems worth it when you can achieve this same frame rate at 4K using much higher graphic settings with less upscaling. So for the couple of people that were considering actually gaming at 6K on the latest 6K gaming monitor, these benchmarks should at the very least give a bit of insight into what the experience will be like compared to gaming at 4K. In situations which are very GPU limited, like playing using the highest quality settings, upping the resolution to 6K will typically halve your frame rate compared to gaming at 4K, even on the RTX 5090. If you are someone comfortable playing the latest titles with intensive features like path tracing at around 80 to 90 FPS, which I think is perfectly fine for many single-player games, upgrading to a 6K resolution will send you below 60 FPS in most cases, often into the 40s, and this will likely be the case even if you use DLSS performance upscaling. From that sense, the RTX 5090 is not really powerful enough for 6K gaming. It certainly can't run the latest titles at 6K using the highest quality settings, even with upscaling enabled. Now that we have a genuine 6K 165Hz gaming monitor, you could argue 6K is the new pinnacle resolution for PC gaming, so in a sense, the RTX 5090 is no longer sufficient for the true best gaming experience. The RTX 5090 is not useless at 6K though, it just requires setting reductions in some titles. This could mean turning off ray tracing or path tracing features, or running the game at a lower preset. Another option is to use DLSS Ultra performance upscaling, though this doesn't always lead to playable frame rates on maximum graphic settings, and it gives you less of the 6K resolution experience due to the level of upscaling being performed. But realistically, on something like a 5090 that I'm spending all that money on to get a premium gaming experience, I'd rather play the games, especially single-player titles, at 4K using high-quality settings than turning off things like ray tracing just to get the game running at 6K. The 5070 Ti though, you can pretty much forget about using this GPU at 6K unless you love playing titles on the lowest settings or at frame rates below 60 FPS, which is quite funny given the 5070 Ti is faster than an RTX 3090, the GPU originally advertised for 8K gaming. If the 5070 Ti can't do 6K, the RTX 3090 absolutely cannot do 8K gaming, not that 8K makes sense today. Originally, I was also planning to look at the RTX 5070 at 6K, but given the struggles of the 5070 Ti, I decided to pass on that entirely, Only the RTX 5090 is even remotely suitable for 6K gaming, and even though the RTX 4090 isn't that much slower, it gets disqualified because it can't use this 6K display at 165Hz. That's not a GPU shader core issue, but a limitation with the display engine. What about frame generation, you might ask? Well, look, you're welcome to use frame generation at a base render rate of 42 FPS if you want to, but it's not something I think leads to a good gaming experience at all. It's also worth noting that frame generation has a higher performance overhead and uses more VRAM when run at high output resolution, so it doesn't give as much of a smoothness boost at 6K relative to 4K, and you typically need to run the 6K game at a higher render rate than you would see at 4K to get a similar output frame rate. Ultimately though, you probably shouldn't consider 6K gaming at all, at least with current hardware. The RTX 5090 is $4,700 US, so it's not really a gaming card anymore. That's the price of a workstation GPU, and you need to fork out that sort of cash to make 6K somewhat of a reality because you need a 5090. That's not including the price of the monitor. The Samsung G80HS is $1,600 US, and in my opinion, you actually are better off getting a 4K 240Hz OLED for gaming instead, which is much cheaper, less performance demanding, and provides proper HDR. And even if you did get the G80HS, you'd use the 3K dual mode for gaming, not the 6K mode, unless you were playing, say, lightweight titles. 6K gaming makes sense for productivity tasks, desktop apps, creator workflows, that sort of thing. 6 years on from Nvidia's silly 8K gaming stunt, not even a lower 6K resolution makes sense for gaming, and it won't make sense for some time to come. But as a high DPI desktop display, it's a great experience, and you can learn more about the G80HS and what it's good at in my review on Monitors Unboxed. So anyway, that's a look at 6K gaming on the 5090 and 5070 Ti. This was a viewer requested video of sorts from our Discord community, which is accessible via Patreon. So if you want to bully me into making videos that you want to see made, a good way to do that is to sign up to our Patreon page, become a Discord member, and start annoying me in there. Although, maybe don't do too much of that, but from time to time we do make videos based on what the viewers want to see, what our Discord members want to see. So this is one of those videos. What else is there to say, really? If you want to support us, as I mentioned, Patreon, there's a few other benefits, monthly live streams, BTS content, plenty of other good stuff. But yeah, that'll pretty much do it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.